right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show. You one-stop shop for all things Commanders. We're super excited to welcome Lindsay Rhodes back to the podcast. Lindsay, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. What a week, you guys. Oh, it's the best time of
I
year.
know
That's time of year.
it has not been boring. Lindsay, last time I talked to you, I believe you were with the Believe Network, now with
Oh,
Sumer
yeah.
Sports.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's Thomas Dimitroff and Eric Eager started, I believe. Eric
Yeah.
Eager's
Eric's
in
now with the
now
Panthers. Yeah.
with the Panthers in the front office. What conversations did you have with Thomas to move over to Sumer Sports?
Um, so there was kind of when Eric took the job with the Panthers, there was like a role vacated from a podcast standpoint, the person that was going to do that show with Thomas. And they're also in the process, I think, as a company of growing in a lot of really, really exciting ways. There is so much data and tech and stuff that, I mean, you guys, the things that they can do now, the smart people, not putting myself in that category at all. The things that they show me are wild. And so I think it's been a really fun transition for me just in terms of having access to some data and some like worlds that I typically don't have access to. And so getting a chance to look at some of this information through a different prism and be in conversations on a regular basis with people who kind of look at it through different lenses than I do and turn that into conversation has been wildly interesting for me. So I've really loved it.
What is kind of one of the big aha moments you've had since being with those guys and kind of having access to that information?
So they have the ability to through the use of tracking data, and they've like taught a model, a computer model, they've had it learn like hundreds of thousands of football plays. And so now the model
Wow.
understands the ways that how like a pass rush move impacts which wide receiver is going to be targeted. Like it's learned how one person's impact on the field affect another person's ability to impact, what's going to happen. And so we can go frame by frame on a play and hover your cursor over a given wide receiver at a time, and it'll tell you if you stop it, 5 frames after the snap, what the completion probability is to that particular wide receiver. And so you kind of go up and down like the offense, and then expected yards, like change whatever filter you're looking for. It can do it on a frame by frame basis. So my brain goes to like that as a potential coaching tool for somebody like
Absolutely.
Caleb Williams, for instance, is the example that I always use because that's the first one that pops into my mind as somebody who is, the numbers suggest that the pressure rate, he needs to get the ball out faster. That's what the numbers tell the story of, because he had the 9th longest time to pressure. The Bears allowed the 9th longest time to pressure last season. And he held on to the ball. I believe the number is the 5th longest time to throw. So that tells me, and he had the highest sack rate in the entire NFL. So if only 8 other quarterbacks have more time than you do before the pressure arrives, then I think that to a degree, there is an offensive line narrative that we're talking about. And I'm not saying the offensive line didn't need to be upgraded, but I'm suggesting that maybe more of it was being placed on the offensive line than needed to be. Like that's relative to other quarterbacks, he actually had longer to get the ball out anyway. So to me, I look at this from a frame by frame standpoint, and I think, I am a visual learner. I need data. I need you to not just tell me to get the ball out faster. I might need to see it. So if you could pull up various plays and you could show, if you got the ball out here, the expected yards are X. Where you got the ball out, the yards were X. And so if you could show a disparity and there was a consistent pattern that emerged, perhaps, then, I mean, think of how fascinating, like how much quicker you could maybe get him to understand the concept. And this goes, for, I mean, it's just across the board. There was a play that we were showing people at Super Bowl where, like, again, Sean Syed is like our big schemes guy, right? So he kind of sees things in a different way, and he just lives in the X's and O's of the film in a way that I do not. And he was like, pulled up this one play and was like, look, Jalen Carter turns his head. And when he turns his head, the model knows what that means for what's going to happen next. And you can see on a graph, like the number go zoop, or
out of control,
whatever it is. And it's wild how predictive it can be. Anyway, we're just going into such an interesting space and time where you guys have seen the advanced data, like how we're looking at numbers like EPA, expected points added. We're looking at things like completion percentage over expectation, rushing yards over expectation, looking at expected stats now. And so you can compare situation, so we can evaluate players in a way that feels much more modern and now, and the ability to understand what's actually happening on the field. These metrics kind of tell better stories than they used to when it was just passing yards and rushing yards. And I mean, we could point to a bunch of different examples there, like Dalvin Cook, when the Vikings moved on from him. There were a lot of people that I heard that were saying like, yeah, but he's one of the best running backs in the league. Look at how many 1,000-yard seasons he's had. People who were looking more closely at that knew that that was really volume driven, and that what he was doing with the volume wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be from an efficiency standpoint. Aaron Rodgers is the perfect example of this from a quarterback standpoint. You've got people in the Jets or fan base who are saying he's the best quarterback we've had in a long time. I think the number is the 8th most passing yards on the season last year. To me, that quite clearly tells a story of an offense that was behind and therefore throwing more frequently. Right. And sure enough, if you go look at the pass attempts, it's like 3rd most in the league. Now you go look at yards per attempt, and now he's like back down to 22, which is roughly the range statistically where he was in most of the efficiency metrics. Anyway, that's a very long answer to that question, but clearly I love this stuff.
I love it. It's fantastic.
It is. And the thing is as little as I know about the large language systems, like whatever it knows now, it'll know, significantly more month by month. How are you using it for fantasy? Because I know you're big into fantasy football.
Yeah, that's the question. We're trying to get it to understand. I think that the key to all of this is understanding the defensive components. From a fantasy standpoint, I think that's one of the things that's kind of lost. You have to like very manually go look up coverage matchups and I think that is a lot of times the story that is told that actually leads us to who's going to have a good fantasy week. It's not so much the offensive patterns, it's the offensive patterns versus the defense specifically that you're going to go up against, and what your pieces against these pieces point to. So I think that there are a lot of really interesting ways that this could point to like matchups that maybe could more effectively highlight like a low-end player who is likely to have a better than average game, or a high-end player who is going to have a worse than average game. And I think that in a lot of our fantasy models, or like, you look at fantasy rankings, and one of the things that I think most fantasy rankings do is they don't knock if it's one of the best wide receivers in the league, or fill in the blank, right, of whatever position, you overvalue that on a week-to-week basis because you think, well, the range of outcomes has to include a high-end possibility for this person. And so what they do, instead of knocking them down to like, I'm going to predict that the 5th best wide receiver in the league is going to finish as wide receiver 25 this week, which is absolutely something that happens on a week-to-week basis. I think what they do is they go, if I think that the number, the computer shows me or whatever, 25, I'm going to knock him down to 8. You know what I mean? Like you knock him down the rankings, but not that much, because you just want to have some built-in variance because the ceiling is so high for this player. And I think it would be just really interesting and fascinating to see if you just went just by like a computer model that fully understood the defense and then just said like, let's just let this ride for a year, because you guys know, I don't know how hardcore you are into fantasy, but like on a week-to-week basis, the randomness at the quarterback position and tight end position in particular is massive. Like you could go on a week-to-week basis and go, name the bad quarterback that finishes in the top 12. Like it happens all the time. And so clearly there have to be models that sort of would predict that understand this is what he's going up against. And so this is in the range of outcomes. It's probably more probable than this, poorer than average player finishing as a poorer than average fantasy player this week. And I am really interested to see where this goes with that.
Real quick, George, before we get into free agency stuff, I'm just curious, Lindsay, if you know when and why and the purpose of the legal tampering period for free agency, because I'm not sure. George and I
Right?
were
Why?
talking about
Why do we have a built-in? Why don't we just make this what happens at
right.
the kickoff? I don't know. I don't
Okay.
know the answer to that. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm sure that there actually is probably a pretty good answer. But it is interesting. And you're right. And like, so the legal tampering period has a start time and they're doing it before then too,
Absolutely.
and that's the funniest
Absolutely.
part. There was something that was said with regards to Geno, and it was like a Raiders reporter, and I'm sure it was rooted in something that's just I'm missing and not the reporter is missing. But the reporter had tweeted something like, hey, just remember with the Raiders being not particularly active in free agency, that they can't actually get a deal done with Geno until he's officially a member of their team on Wednesday at 4 Eastern. And I kind of was like, what? Like, yeah, I mean, officially they can't come up with a deal, but if they don't know the numbers by now, they're cooked. Like,
Yeah.
Of course they've had this conversation. Like, we're really going to pretend that we don't know what kind of money we're working with in free agency because I don't know what Geno's going to want. Like, of course we do.
Absolutely.
Of course.
I don't believe that one bit, 100%.
No.
All right. So speaking of free agency, Lindsay, I'm just curious, from a national perspective, how do you feel about the Commanders' offseason moves? Yeah, I love that reaction. Laramie Tunzel, Deebo Samuel, Javon Kinlaw. What are your thoughts so far on that? And where do they stand in the NFC on top of that?
Look, I think that in terms of I think free agency in a lot of ways is like zooming out. If you're paying attention to all 32, you're like, what stories are they telling us? What stories are they telling us about what their draft approach is going to be? What stories are they telling us about how they value different position groups on their team, where they think holes are, and also where they think they are in terms of the big competitive picture. And my big takeaway is, and we already knew this, that the Commanders probably went further than even they expected last year. And they kind of found themselves maybe mid-season going like, oh, snap, like we can actually do this. And I don't think anybody thought that they were even going to, I don't think they even thought like, hey, it's Super Bowl this year. And then they got so freaking close, much closer than I think most people expected. And so what I think the story is that we're seeing is they're going now. Like, do all of the things now, take advantage of the fact that you've got Jaden on his rookie deal. We can add these expensive pieces that might not be long, but you don't have to do a slow strategic build. There are certain teams that can kind of throw all of the traditional process concepts that we prefer. And that goes to like draft positional value, right? Like the Lions are an example of a team a few years ago when they drafted Gibbs, and then they went running back and linebacker in the first round. And as somebody that had already been an early adopter, I was in on the Lions from like Dan Campbell's first year. I was like, I hate this because it goes against everything that I believe in terms of positional value with the draft. I think that what we've learned is that when you have these other things and your moment is now and you believe your moment is now, you can do things for now. That might not, you might have to pay the price later for that, but like you can go throw all the rules out. And this feels like a throw all the rules out type of free agency for the Commanders. Like, let's put all of the pieces, upgrade, take advantage of the ways in which the Texans might have had a poor offensive line and might not be willing to pay for Laramie Tunsil because the return on investment for them as a unit just wasn't worth it. And so go find those pieces and add them. And that's why I know a lot of us are eyeing the Trey Hendrickson situation very closely. I think he makes a lot of sense for the Commanders because of the other moves that have telegraphed now. And so
do you think he'll become available, or do you think he's going to be like spring loose? It seems it's going back and forth.
So I mean, maybe I'm just a sucker, I guess, but yes, I kind of thought that he would, because at some point they need to pay some of these guys or not pay them. Like you can't just keep for a year early in the process when they first tagged T and just pushed the Chase deal down the road. I'm thinking maybe they think that this is a win now and then maybe blow it up a little bit like, and I hate the way that the whole Rams Super Bowl when they did it was framed. I hate it. I think it was wrong. I thought it was inaccurate at the time. I never thought that they were mortgaging their future for that year. I think that they thought that they had a plan in place where they thought that they could do it in a sustainable way. And I think we've seen the ways in which that's true. But I think that the Bengals felt like a team last year that was like, okay, now go get it now. And then let's revisit and see if we have a Super Bowl under our belt, then we can kind of go, okay, let's flip it now. And then bring in a more sustainable piece and do this one at a time. But now they're kind of chasing it. And so they feel like they're trying to hang on in terms of being competitive and being in that mix. The defense just falling off a cliff last year. That feels like that threw a massive wrench in their plans. But like, I don't know what their plan is right now. It doesn't feel like a very obvious, because they're not coming up with anything that looks like a long-term answer. It looks like they're just putting band-aids, like they're plugging the holes of the dike in that old story. Like it's, and so I feel like at some point they probably have to turn some of that into draft capital, right? So if you could flip Trey, not pay him, and Trey's insane, but also he was insane and their defense was still terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe if you're the Bengals, you're thinking, let's take advantage of the fact that he is at his peak, coming off an all-pro season, best season of his career. And there are teams like the Commanders, there are teams, and it doesn't sound like the Lions, but I mean, if I was the Lions, I would absolutely consider sending them a 1, because to put him on the same line as Aiden Hutchinson, now I'm like, we're cooking with gas. We are 100% in that end of season story. And that's,
is that one will take, will it be a first round pick in your opinion to get Trey Hendrickson loose?
We went back and forth at Sumer, like the text conversations about Trey Hendrickson. When I tell you that, I mean, hundreds of texts back and forth, nobody could agree. And not just the people in Sumer, I was sending it to other people, like former GMs, like, what do you think? All over the place. And when I say all over the place, from 1 to 5, like it was like wild. This was before free agency started. And so now you have a little bit more of a frame of what some of these other guys
parameters
have gone for. Yeah. I think that the concerns for people are that he is older, 30, and that he has not been, so in terms of the Miles comp, you have Miles who has been, whether he's been an all-pro or not, has been like a DPOY type guy, but every year, consistently. Trey is a guy who in the last couple of years has been really, really massively effective, but also it's like there's more of a sample. And so you're like, I don't know how much I trust this compared to Miles. Exactly.
Safer bet with Miles. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Right.
So you're having a different conversation to a degree about those two. That said, I think if, we were having a conversation, our trade comp for Miles was 2 1s. Like, I'm like, I don't know how you go from 2 1s for Miles to a 3 for Trey. Like, that's just way too big a gap for me. And I talked to a few other people that said that they agreed too. Thomas Dimitroff said on our radio show last week that he would be fine giving up a 1 for Trey Hendrickson. And that's where I keep landing too. And especially so Commanders.
29.
Look at all the moves. Look at all the moves that you guys have made so far this year. Look at the draft capital that you have left and just how you would use those pieces. If sending one of those pieces, so you've got 3 picks in the top 80, and then you've got 3 after 200. So you've got 3 picks that you can really use that are going to maybe help you now.
I agree.
Or that you can count on helping you now. Send one of those for Trey based on the moves that you've made and the ways that you might have overspent already. Go all the way in. Don't take a pass rusher in the draft that it has questions attached to it, because there are like a Shamar Stewart. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I always want to put a Sanders and Shador Sanders and Shamar. There's too many S's.
A lot of alliteration going on. Exactly right. 100%.
But he's a guy who I think, talking to people who evaluate the classes and watched him at Senior Bowl, he's a guy who has like very high-end capabilities, but is wildly inconsistent. And that's the production conversation that we're having attached to him. The athleticism's off the charts. So there are teams that are going to go, oh my God, the things that we could do with him. But the fact that he doesn't do it on a down-to-down basis, that win rate isn't there consistently, tells me that where I would value him most in the draft is if I'm a team that already has a 1. I would love to add him
like
as
a Robin to a Batman, right? Yeah, 100%.
I mean, going back to the Lions, put him on the opposite side of Aiden Hutchinson.
Mhm.
And now we're talking because you're going to get you want him to go against right tackles, right? Like that's what I've heard from people about him. But that's not where we're putting him in the draft. We're having him go in the top 15 of the draft. And usually those teams are not those teams. So he's anyway, all of this is to say that if I'm like the Commanders and that's what I'm looking at, why not give that one that I would use on getting a guy like that for a guy who I think history tells us could still produce at a very high level for a good 4 years or so, you know? So I would be fine giving up a 1 for Trey Hendrickson if I'm that specific team, right? And the Commanders are not the only one, but I need to be a team that is either going to become a playoff team because of this ad. Like now I'm sure we're in the playoff mix, or
cherry on top.
is already a playoff team and now we're going for it all. We're going to win the Lombardi.
Yeah, because it'll be hard, like even for the biggest Commanders fans, it'll be hard to not realize that like a lot of what the wins they had last year, like 5 of them on the last play or drive of the game, adding talent. We try not to knock the last regime, but they left the cupboards really bare. It's an odd thing for Adam Peters, right? Because there are no former first or second round picks from like the last 4 years on the roster to re-sign, which is why there's so many 1-year deals coming along. He wants to build through the draft. You know that. That's how his whole career's been every step along the way. And yet he finds himself here with, the 6 draft picks, like you said, 3 real high and 3 very low. I have no problem giving up 29. I mean, literally, you have to get to the Super Bowl to have a worse pick than 29. Chances that the Commanders' first round, I just want to make sure I've got my picks next year because although you're hoping to get to the Super Bowl, numbers suggest that you're probably going to have a better pick next year. I'd ship 29. I think the problem that a lot of Commanders fans have is, there's 2 kind of assets in the NFL: money and draft capital. And giving up one for a player, you can kind of get behind. Having to give up both for a player, I think, is where people get a little concerned. If it's $40 million for Miles, is it 30 million? Is it 3 years, 90 million, something like that for Trey Hendrickson? Because I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's nobody in my mind that you're getting at 29 that's going to be better for the next 3 years than Trey Hendrickson. And that's kind of like where I'm at here with these deals, right? And a lot of the NFL is these 3-year deals. Players want them that way so they can get back anyway. You're always trying to line these things up with Jaden Daniels and that cheap money. 29 feels like this isn't last year's or the year before's Commanders pick where you're drafting in the top 10, right? You're drafting at the bottom. It's basically a second round pick. I'm fine giving up the pick.
And by the way, I also like this range of the draft is sometimes people talk about like those picks like they are, well, I mean, they're obviously less valuable than like picking at 3 or whatever. But also I've heard it framed like, the Eagles have hit on their draft picks despite the fact that they're consistently on the back end of the first. I'm like, they're hitting on those draft picks because they're on the back end of the first and because of the story behind why they're at the back end of the first. The Eagles have been such good drafters for years because they are never in a position where they are desperate. Never. Yeah. That's when you make mistakes. We're talking about these teams at the top in the quarterback class. And it's like, I mean, we keep going back and forth about whether or not the quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, even though no one that I have talked to has said that those are the 2 best players in the draft. No one. Every single person I've talked to has said emphatically Abdul Carter is the best person in the draft. Yeah. He is the best player in the draft. So then you've got Travis Hunter, who feels special, right? He's a blue chipper. Are either of these quarterbacks blue chippers? I don't think they're evaluated that way. I think that after talking to a lot of people at Combine, it felt very clear to me that we're talking about those 2 guys in the same bucket because we keep putting them in the top, handful of picks because teams are supply and demand, desperate for quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have anything. I get it. But the way that they talked about them felt like people did buy into Cam. People were talking very highly and specifically about what they liked about Cam. When I asked about Shedeur Sanders, and I hate to belabor this point because I feel like we've kind of gone through this whole Shedeur cycle that might have gone a little bit too far. But my read of the situation is that they talked about him going high because of need, not because let me tell you about this guy who's going to be great in the NFL and all the reasons that I know he's going to be great in the NFL. So this is a point being, when you're picking in that range, you have needs. You have to fill those needs or else you don't have anything. And that's how you can make mistakes. Obviously in the Commanders case, you guys, I don't know if lucky is the right word, right? But like, you nailed it. You nailed it. And the quarterback worked out and awesome. When you can fill these holes, I think via free agency, via whatever, and you're picking at the bottom of the draft and you don't have a glaring hole. Like the Broncos are a team that has made some sneaky moves this offseason to kind of put themselves in a position where I don't see a hole with the Broncos. I mean, I would love a few more wide receivers. Okay. Well, but I mean, Bo Nix, I think they got a starter out of the class. And I think that Bo Nix is actually, even though in terms of the efficiency metrics didn't like pop last year, I think that he's a guy that Sean Payton can work with, that will run his offense. And I think that that's exactly why Russell Wilson is no longer there, because he would tuck it and run and Sean Payton would lose his mind. Even if the play ended up being a positive play, he'd be like, run my offense, you know? And so, excuse me, rookie move. And so if they get somebody like a Bo Nix that I think they feel confident can run their offense, I think they need to add some wide receivers. It's a terrible year for that. But like, there are some pieces, but I love what they did on the defensive side of the ball, adding Hufanga and some guys that like the high end is high if it hits, you know, and there's some injury concerns there too. But if you could put yourself in a position going into the draft where you are not desperate, then you're going to nail that pick. And that's how the Eagles end up with Jalen Carter.
Exactly. Match someone to your team pretty much. Yeah,
totally. But I mean, like, you know, so then a Jalen Carter who starts to fall because of whatever concerns there are, they go, God, we got depth. I mean, like, if it doesn't work out here, we're still fine. And then you take a swing on the talent, and then maybe partially because there's depth and a good environment that guy goes into, and they're not desperate for them. Maybe that's how you get the best out of them too, because they kind of know that's how they fit in, and they better bring it. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. You guys are in a good, the Commanders are in a
I wish I was in that position. Yeah. So Lindsay, I kind of feel like that because of what you just said, that kind of has shaped free agency, right? Our quarterback, we've seen Geno Smith go to the Raiders, Sam Darnold going to the Seahawks, right? They're kind of mixing and matching the quarterbacks. Do you think that's a result of the top of the draft and not necessarily being confident with the quarterbacks? And
I'm sorry, I need you to repeat that because I just saw in the comments about Dante Fowler and I was thinking about Dante Fowler. And so I stopped listening to you and I want to listen to the question.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying, because of free agency, we saw that, we're seeing quarterbacks potentially move around, right? Geno Smith going to the Raiders, Sam Darnold's going to the Seahawks. Yeah. Has that been is that a result of not being very confident in the quarterbacks in the top of the draft? And I'm also curious what happens with Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers as well. Your thoughts on that?
And real quick, is there a quarterback problem in the NFL when teams are still worried about paying Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins big money? Like, why are we having such a problem getting good quarterback play in the NFL?
I don't. Yes, it's a problem. I'm just like, I feel like I'm going crazy over here with the whole Aaron Rodgers is like we're waiting for his answer as opposed to the other way around. Because I think based on his play last year, married with his play his last year in Green Bay, which is an important part of this story. The last year he was in Green Bay, his play fell off a cliff. In a ton of like our Sumer score metrics, like which are based on tracking data. Obviously the year before had been a MVP year, and then it fell. And there are every stat needs context. There's always context that can explain a stat, right? So that it's possible that was the rookie wide receivers and they didn't, they were never on the same page, or it could be an injury. It could be whatever, right? But the fact that it fell off already, then he goes to New York. You're now asking a question. Why? Why did it fall off? Is this the beginning of a decline, or is there a reason here? Then he gets hurt, and then he comes back a year later, and it's even worse. Like, it's even worse, and it's worse across the board in every way in New York this year. Now I think you have to wonder, like, we built on a pattern. that was already there. We should have already had questions. The fact that those questions didn't go that way are concerning to me. I don't think I'm preaching to a choir, I think here. So I don't think that Aaron Rodgers should be in a position where he holds cards. That tells us how desperate these teams are. That Aaron Rodgers is sitting somewhere on a beach thinking about his future and whether or not he wants to take these offers. And the fact that there are multiple offers, it sounds like, is wild to me. But I do wonder too what it does say about the draft class, because, and I said this about Geno too, when he got traded to the Raiders, it says one of two things, and I don't know. We don't know the answer yet. It either says that they didn't have faith in a quarterback that they wanted still being on the table for them when it got to them at 6, that they thought that the quarterbacks they were interested were all going to be gone, or that they didn't like the quarterback that was going to still be there. So, and to me, it's a Shedeur question, because I don't think there's any question that Cam Ward is going to be off the board. So is Shedeur going to be gone by 6, or are they less excited about, what that looks like, drafting Shedeur at 6? I think that that's the Geno Smith story. I think that that's also a story that you could talk about with the Giants. The Giants sitting at 3, and the fact that they're in on Aaron Rodgers has me wondering what's happening. Do they think that Shedeur is going to go in the top 2? Do they think it's going to go Titans, Browns, Cam, Shedeur, and the quarterbacks are off, and now they're just left without, they're the one without a chair in the musical chair game of quarterbacks, and so they have to go get Aaron or Russell or whoever that's out there right now. Or, as has also been floated, did they sign Aaron Rodgers, or are they trying to sign Aaron Rodgers, and are they still thinking of trying to move to 1 to go up and get a quarterback? And this just gives them leverage in that negotiation. So you can't just take them for whatever they're worth. Like if they need that quarterback, then, you want to have something in the stable so that they don't know how desperate you are. But I cannot imagine, of all of the veteran quarterbacks out there, wanting to put Aaron Rodgers in a room with someone that I'm thinking about taking number 1 overall. Like that's just not the combination. I'd be fine with Russell with that. But I just can't imagine creating that quarterback room on purpose. So I don't know, man. I have lots of questions about what the heck is happening right now at quarterback.
So speaking of dynamics, one more quick question to follow up with. Why is JJ McCarthy being overlooked in Minnesota? I know he was coming off an injury and he wasn't.
Imagine getting rid of Sam Darnold to pick up Aaron Rodgers. Be crazy.
Yeah, I don't get that at all. Like what? Like I feel like he was a potential for. He was a first round pick and there's a high end. These has the analytics said he did great on 3rd down and big time throws and things like that. So I'm kind of curious why there isn't confidence in him moving forward.
And also, all of the other quarterbacks hit.
Yeah.
And so this kind of goes back to another part of your question, which is about the quarterback problem right now. And I have questions about whether or not we have answers coming at the college level that are greater than what we've had in the past, in ways that we just don't know yet, because I think there's a component here to the transfer portal issue. And the fact that these guys are trading up consistently in their college careers, I think that there could be something to the fact that no one is going to a big powerhouse out of high school and staying there their entire career. What you're seeing now is that guys are constantly moving up, which means that they're working with different coaches. They're working in different offensive schemes. They're working with different languages and playbooks. They're learning it. They're working with different coordinators. And what we have now, if you are someone we're talking about near the top of the draft at quarterback, and you've done all of that, that means that you've done that well.
It's pretty good,
you've
right?
Succeeded in each step. So now we've got signal attached to you that isn't trait based. It's not just who's got the biggest arm and, hey, this quarterback was really good in this high level college program for 5 years, but how will that look in the NFL? We've got so much more evidence now. And I think maybe most importantly, we have evidence that they're adaptable. And so I think that there's something that I want to watch for the next few years about whether or not their floor isn't just higher their rookie year. You're going to see fewer quarterbacks coming in that just are like way underwater for their first few years.
Yeah.
And so if you take them high, if they're less likely to bust out, they might not reach their ceiling right away like Jaden did.
Floor. Yeah,
but maybe if the floor is high enough, it buys them more time to reach that ceiling. that other quarterbacks didn't have, because we were like, oh crap,
Great
they're
point.
terrible
Yeah,
for
that's
their
a great
first few
point.
years.
Great point.
So I wonder if there aren't, reinforcements on the way in this way. But in the short term, I just went like this with, I don't even remember.
No, I love it.
what
That
we
was
were
great.
talking
That was
about.
great
The
insight.
Vikings.
I love it.
The Vikings.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like smoke. I don't believe it. But also, I didn't believe that Aaron was going to have the Sooners that he has now. So I might just be misreading. I mean, I think sometimes what happens is I look so deep into the data and I come away with a really strong opinion, and I think everyone must have that opinion too, right? And so one of the things that I need to be reminded is that we don't all go through this process the same way, and there might be people who aren't looking at the same data points as me, or are willing to say, like if they've been around the NFL for a lot longer, they might say like, yeah, but those traits and what we've seen from Aaron in the past, and if he's better this year, and if the Achilles is a year further along in its recovery, and they might just be willing to bet on the upside, whether or not there's any evidence that they should be betting on the upside, because he's shown us in the past. And if he's that again, then look what we got. But I have a hard time believing the Vikings are that team, because Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah is a very analytically driven general manager. I mean, about as like modern as you can get in terms of the way that you're going to look at the NFL. And it feels like a situation that they've set up for JJ. So if they go in a different direction, I would think that has to do with an injury setback more than anything else.
Let's get you out of here on this one, Lindsay. Who do you think ends up quarterbacking for the Steelers, the Jets, and the Giants going forward next year?
Steelers, Jets, Giants. So if I were the Steelers at this point, and I think I'm glad I'm not, I think I'd go back to Russell. And I think that this is like a devil you know versus devil you don't know, but almost like flipped in the outcome. I think that they're like, well, I kind of know what Russell can't do. And so let's go with the guy over here who I'm not 100% sure what they can't do, and that's Aaron. I think what Russell doesn't do well now is I think there are some things that he can't do. I think that what he can do is, they can create one-on-ones along the sideline, and he can throw like moon balls their way, and let George Pickens go get it. DK, go get it. Maybe use that big body and win some of those contested catch situations. I think that if you have to come back to this, and this is the situation you're looking at, I think I would rather have Russell than Aaron. It looks like they're choosing differently, but I like that for them. Now, that said, as soon as I was like, both of those wide receivers in the same offense, I kind of like, everyone I know they started texting me like, I actually think George Pickens is gone. So a lot of people think that George Pickens is going to get traded this offseason. And then we're left with like, I don't know what the Steelers are doing, because if you bring in DK, who's not a guy that I love as a one, I'm fine with pairing him with another one that I don't love. So you have a 1A, 1B, but I don't know where we are if we trade Pickens, and now they don't have Najee, and you don't have I just don't know what's going on. So this is a bad situation, I think, for me. The Jets, I would like to see Justin Fields. Like they went with Justin Fields. It's not a big contract, so they could certainly add more pieces to that room, but I would very much like to see, and again, the numbers don't show that this is what they're doing. I would like to see somebody put him very purposefully in a situation that highlights the things that he can do and does not ask him as much to do the things that he cannot do. I just want to see it, And so I'd love to lean into an offense that specifically highlights his strengths. And I think in a year where there aren't a lot of good quarterback options is the year to do that. Like, just go do those things, lean into it and see if it'll work. And then if it doesn't work, then you're drafting a quarterback next year, and maybe it's a better quarterback draft class. But I wouldn't throw asset after asset if I already have a guy that I think I could probably get through the season with him, and it wouldn't be terrible. I thought he was fine in Pittsburgh. In a lot of ways, by the end of the season, it looked like he was better than Russell. I think what teams figured out with Russell toward the end was they were like, the things I said he can't do and the things he can do. I think that they
start taking away.
They became clear to defenses too. And so I think that and also there's volatility attached to that. And if Pickens isn't playing out of his mind every week, then it doesn't work. Right. So, and the Giants, I don't know. I mean, what this conversation does prove is that, is why we're having this conversation. There just aren't as many good options out there. I don't think that, I don't think there's that much difference. I know this is blasphemy. I don't think there's that much difference between Aaron Rodgers and like a high level bridge, out there, like your Jameis Winston tier. At this point, I don't think there's enough there that it's worth taking that on.
I can see
all
that.
of the things that go along with it. So I think I would take a good player if I were them. This is not what they'll do. I'm sure that they're going to take a quarterback if one is available at 3. I think I would try to max out, go get Abdul Carter or Hunter, whichever one's still left, and then grab a quarterback, maybe in the 2nd, put that guy in the mix and grab me a bridge that's in that, Gardner Minshew, Jameis Winston type tier. But I could be wrong. Maybe this is absolutely a fine spot for Shedeur because of the things that I said about the floor being higher. It's just there are other concerns. He's highly accurate. He is really accurate. There are just some other things tied to athleticism that he doesn't necessarily do well.
That's
there
what
are
I'm hearing
some
too.
in some of our Sumer score metrics, like decision making and timing and some of that kind of stuff. It's like he's on the highest of high end in terms of accuracy. And then he's close to the bottom in some of the other areas. And you're like, I don't know what to do with that. Right. It's too wildly there's too much separation. And we don't know which ones are more important in terms of being predictive. So I don't know. That's a really long, convoluted answer that generally tells you I'm glad I'm not them.
As a Commanders fan, I hope you're wrong about Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. I hope they reach for Shedeur Sanders. I'd be very happy with that.
Right. See, doesn't that tell you the answer though?
It does.
Yes.
It does. 100%.
If the answer is not screaming this is our guy, build smartly. Just build smartly. Don't make a glaring mistake that you're going to pay for. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what Shedeur is in that range. I'm just saying that's a roll of the dice. It feels like a roll of the dice in that range. When you have other guys there that feel less like a roll of the dice.
Chip.
If you're sure that Travis Hunter is going to be very good for my defense for years to come, go figure it out some other way. Just figure it out some other way. And that might be why, people might be like, that's what they're doing with Aaron, Lindsay. Why are you so mad? So I concede that.
Lindsay, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a good time. Maybe we'll do it again once fantasy football gets into full swing.
Yes. Good. After the draft, and we can start plugging them all in. Oh, it's so fun. Thank you guys for having me.
You're awesome. Thank you. Appreciate you.